All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into some serious choppy waters. We're talking about the U.S. federal government, and let me tell you, things are getting wild.
Wild is an understatement. It's like a political earthquake just hit D.C., and the aftershocks are still rippling out.
And we've got the perfect mix of sources to make sense of it all. We're talking news articles, hot off the press, court filings that could give John Grisham a run for his money.
Don't forget the social media posts. We need to hear what real people are saying, how they're reacting to all this craziness.
Exactly. It's like taking the temperature right there on the ground. So picture this. You land your dream job, you're excited, ready to make a difference, and then bam, a few months later, you're out.
Along with a good chunk of your department, gone just like that.
Thousands of federal workers are facing that reality right now. And get this, we've even got a former inspector general suing to get their job back.
Yeah, the speed and the sheer scale of these actions is just mind-blowing. We're not talking about isolated incidents here. This is a systemic shift.
A shift that's impacting the lives of thousands of people. Okay, let's hit rewind for a second. Back to January 24th, 2025. That's when the first bombshell dropped.
Trump fired at least 17 inspectors general across all these key agencies. Defense, state, energy, just gone, reportedly through a simple email.
An email, citing changing priorities, whatever that means. And it didn't stop there, did it?
Nope, the dominoes just kept falling. Days later, Gwen Wilcox, she was the National Labor Relations Board chair, she's out.
And then by early February, the mass layoffs hit. CMS, FDA, NIH, these are organizations that directly impact the services we all rely on.
Absolutely, things that touch our everyday lives. Healthcare, food safety, scientific research, it's a big deal.
And the way these layoffs went down, it sounds chaotic, to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of our sources are saying there was this real lack of clear communication, adding to the confusion, the anxiety. Just imagine getting an email saying you're fired, and then another one saying you're not.
Oh man, I can't even imagine the stress.
Well, that's exactly what happened at the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Employees getting these contradictory emails, not knowing if they had a job or not.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
And it gets worse. On February 10th, another big name is fired, Kathy Harris from the Merit Systems Protection Board.
All this is happening, people are losing their jobs, and at the same time, the lawsuits are starting to pile up.
You got it. By mid-February, 8 former inspectors general filed suit. They want their jobs back. Then you have the National Treasury Employees Union. They're suing too, challenging the legality of all these firings.
Particularly those targeting probationary employees, right?
That's a whole other can of worms we need to unpack later. And then there's Hampton Dellinger, former head of the Office of Special Counsel. He gets fired, files his own lawsuit, and a judge actually temporarily reinstates him.
It's like a legal whirlwind, and it's still spinning. We've got these lawsuits winding their way through the courts. Federal employees are on edge, wondering what's next.
And then into all this walks Elon Musk, calling for even more cuts to the government, even suggesting deleting entire agencies.
Deleting, like poof, they're gone. That sounds a little extreme, even for Musk.
Yeah, he's working with the administration on this thing called the Department of Government Efficiency, but wiping out entire agencies, that's a whole different level of disruption.
It makes you wonder about the potential fallout. What happens to those vital services, the institutional knowledge? Is this really the way to make government better?
Those are some big questions, and we're going to tackle them head on. Because this isn't just some routine reshuffling. This is a fundamental shift in how the federal government operates.
It's about power, worker rights, the future of the civil service. There's so much at stake here.
Absolutely, but before we go any further, I think we need to put some faces to these headlines. Get to know the key players in this drama. Because behind all the legal jargon and political maneuvering, there are real people whose lives are being turned upside down. All right, so let's pull back the curtain a bit and meet some of the people driving this whole government shakeup.
Well, we got to start with the man himself, right? Donald Trump, President of the United States, the one calling the shots on these massive personnel changes and all those proposed budget cuts.
But it's not a one-man show, you know? There are other figures who are really shaping this whole thing, like Caroline Leavitt. She's the White House press secretary, and she's been super vocal defending the administration's actions.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading some of her statements. Pretty strong stuff.
Strong is one way to put it. She's even gone on record saying they expect to win in court. That's a pretty bold statement.
It makes you think they've got a solid legal strategy. They're not backing down anytime soon.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Not everyone is on board with this whole approach, even within the Republican Party itself.
Oh, really? I thought there would be more support for cutting back the government, especially from Republicans.
Well, yeah, smaller government is kind of their thing, but even some Republicans are raising concerns about how this is all being done. Like Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, he's known for being tough on government accountability, but even he's urging more transparency about these firings.
So he's not necessarily against the firings themselves, but he wants more justification, more evidence.
Right. He's essentially saying, show me the receipts, prove to us why these inspectors general had to go. And then you've got Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. She's been much more critical, especially about the impact these firings are having on federal workers in her state.
That's got to be tough for those employees, all this uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. And Murkowski's really calling that out. She's talking about the confusion, anxiety, and now trauma that these firings are causing. It's a pretty stark contrast to Levitt's will win in court attitude.
Yeah, it shows there's definitely not a unified front on this issue, even within the same party. And are there any other voices of dissent?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some interesting perspectives out there. Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, he's another Republican, and he's generally in favor of smaller government, but even he's criticizing the FBI job cuts.
The FBI, that's a pretty big deal. What's his reasoning there?
Well, he's saying that firing a bunch of new agents isn't going to make the FBI more efficient. It's just going to create more problems down the line.
Huh, that's a good point. So even if you believe in shrinking the government, there's still a question of how you do it, right?
Exactly. It's not as simple as just flashing budgets and firing people. You have to think about the long-term consequences. And we've got to remember that we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet here. These are people's lives, their careers, their families.
Yeah, it's easy to lose sight of the human cost of these decisions.
One story that really stuck with me was that of Hampton Dellinger, the former head of the Office of Special Counsel. He's actually fighting back against his dismissal, and he's not going down without a fight.
His case is a good example of the legal challenges the administration is facing, and there are so many other stories out there, everyday people caught up in this whirlwind.
One that really stood out was the letter from a USDA employee who was fired. It was heartbreaking, reading about their fear, their uncertainty. They talked about constantly feeling like they had to prove their worth, and that they were basically sitting ducks when it came to these cuts.
It's a stark reminder that behind all the political maneuvering, there are real people whose lives are being upended. And we talked about social media earlier. What are people saying online?
It's a mix of emotions, really. On LinkedIn and Reddit, you see a lot of former federal employees sharing their stories. Shock, sadness, worry about what the future holds. It's really eye-opening seeing those raw, unfiltered reactions.
It definitely makes this whole situation feel more real, more human.
For sure. And speaking of real people, there's this whole category of employees that seems to be really bearing the brunt of these firings, probationary employees.
Oh, yeah, I remember that term coming up a lot in our research. What exactly does that mean?
So basically, a probationary employee is someone who's new to the federal government. They've been on the job for less than a year. And the thing is, they have very limited job protections compared to permanent employees.
Oh, so they're easier to fire.
You got it. They don't have the same appeal rights, so they're more vulnerable to being let go. And it seems like the Trump administration is really focusing on these probationary employees in their efforts to downsize the government.
Huh. Even if you believe in smaller government, that seems kind of unfair, doesn't it? Targeting the newest, most vulnerable employees, what kind of message does that send?
Well, it definitely creates a climate of uncertainty and fear, not just for those probationary employees, but for everyone in the federal workforce. And honestly, constantly churning through new hires could actually make the government less efficient in the long run.
How so?
Think about it. You lose all that experience, all that institutional knowledge every time you let go of someone who's been there a while. And then you have to spend time and resources training new people. It's a short-sighted strategy, even if it saves some money in the short term.
It makes you wonder about the bigger picture here. I mean, the administration is saying all this is about efficiency, accountability, draining the swamp. But is there more to it than that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? When you dig a little deeper, you start to see some inconsistency, some contrasting viewpoints. For example, those inspector general firings. Were they really about accountability? Or was it more about removing oversight of the administration's actions?
Yeah, especially with Senator Grassley calling for more transparency around those dismissals, it makes you wonder.
Exactly. And then you have Elon Musk. He's working with the administration on this whole government efficiency thing, but he's taking it even further, calling for deleting entire agencies.
I still can't get over that, deleting entire agencies. That's a radical approach, to say the least.
It is, and it sparked a lot of debate. I mean, his goal might be streamlining government, making it more efficient, but there are a lot of people who are pushing back, saying it's not that simple.
Yeah, like Randy Irwin, he's the president of the National Federation of Federal Employees, and he's argued that firing skilled workers actually makes things less efficient, not more.
Right, he's saying that you lose all that expertise, and it ultimately hurts the services that the government provides. Things slow down, the stakes happen, the quality of services goes down. It kind of defeats the whole purpose.
So the efficiency argument might be more complicated than it seems at first glance. It's not just about cutting fat, it's about fundamentally reshaping the government. But the question is, to what end? What are the long-term consequences of all this?
That's what we need to figure out. Even if some of these firings get reversed in court, the damage might already be done. We could be looking at a future where These agencies are less effective, less experienced, less able to serve the American people.
And that's what it all boils down to, isn't it? The impact on everyday people.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of that.
So the FDA, they're the folks making sure what we eat and the meds we take are actually safe, right?
You got it. They're the gatekeepers. And if the FDA is short-staffed or everyone's just demoralized from all these cuts and firings, well, it could have a real domino effect.
Domino effect how? Give me an example.
Imagine you need a new medication, something crucial for your health. But because the FDA is stretched thin, it takes way longer for them to approve it. Or maybe there are safety risks with our food because inspectors are overworked and can't keep up.
Okay, now that's getting a little too real for me.
And it's not just the FDA. We're talking about a whole bunch of agencies that could be impacted.
Like what? What other areas should we be worried about?
Think about the environment. If the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, if they get gutted, who's going to protect our air and water? What about agencies like the FBI? If they lose funding and staff, it could really damage public trust.
It's like, who do you even turn to if you don't trust the people who are supposed to be protecting you?
Exactly. And these aren't just what-if scenarios. We've seen this kind of thing happen before, and the results weren't pretty.
Makes me think of Hurricane Katrina and all the problems with FEMA.
FEMA is a perfect example. They got slammed for their response, and a big part of the problem was that they've been weakened in the years leading up to the hurricane. Budget cuts, staffing shortages, it all added up.
So history is repeating itself, basically.
Well, there are definitely some parallels. We're seeing similar patterns, and that should give us all pause.
So it's not just about government bureaucracy. It's about real-world consequences. People's lives, their health, their safety. It's all on the line.
And we haven't even talked about the long-term implications. Even if some of these firings are reversed, the effects could linger for years.
Like what kind of long-term stuff are we talking about?
Well, one big concern is the loss of expertise. When you fire experienced people, you create a knowledge gap that's not easy to fill. It takes time to train new people, and you can't just replace years of experience overnight.
So basically you're saying firing people actually makes the government less efficient in the long run.
It can, yeah. Especially when you consider the cost of training new employees, the time it takes for them to get up to speed. And then there's the morale factor. When people are constantly worried about losing their jobs, it creates a pretty toxic work environment.
Yeah, I can imagine. Who can focus on doing their best work when they're stressed out about their job security?
Right, and that leads to lower productivity, higher turnover. It just creates a vicious cycle.
And all this talk about draining the swamp, it seems like it's doing more harm than good.
And then there's the issue of public trust. When people see these agencies getting gutted, their functions disrupted. It makes them question whether the government can actually serve their needs.
Especially with agencies like the FBI and the EPA, they really depend on public cooperation to do their jobs effectively.
Absolutely. So we've got this potential loss of expertise, declining morale, eroding public trust. All of these factors combined could really weaken the government's ability to function in the long run.
It's a pretty bleak picture. So what can people do if they're concerned about all this? It feels like these decisions are being made behind closed doors, and there's nothing we can do to stop it.
I know it can feel that way, but it's important not to give in to that feeling of helplessness. The first step is to stay informed, like you're doing right now, by listening to this deep dive.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. But it's also crucial to talk about these issues with your friends, your family, your elected officials.
So share what we're learning, ask questions, make our voices heard.
That's the idea. Contact your representatives, let them know that you're paying attention, that you care about these issues.
It sounds like we all need to step up and be more engaged citizens.
Now more than ever, these decisions are going to have ripple effects for years to come. They're going to shape the future of the U.S. civil service and ultimately the government's ability to serve the American people.
So we've got to ask ourselves, if this keeps happening, what's the government going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years? Will it actually be more efficient and accountable, like the administration says? Or will it be weaker, less effective, more vulnerable to corruption?
Those are the big questions we all need to be thinking about.
Well, this has been a real eye-opener, I got to say. We've covered a lot of ground here, the firings, the lawsuits, the human impact, the potential consequences. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure. It's been a great discussion. And to everyone listening out there, remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring these issues, stay engaged, and most importantly, make your voice heard.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the U.S. federal government. We've got links to all the resources we mentioned in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. Stay informed, stay curious, and stay involved, folks.